Good morning, grandchildren. This is your Grandpa Bill. I'm now 64 years old, almost 65 in maybe another month or so. Just wanted to talk to you today and tell you a little bit about my early days in the boat business. I was actually riding my bike, and I'd always go to this shop called Griffins, and they sold Schwinn bikes there. And I was in there, and I got to be good friends with the owner, and who I called Grandpa Griffin. And over time, I became friends with him and his wife. His name was Ray, and his wife's name was Edna, but I always called him Grandma and Grandpa. So one day, I was in the seventh grade and rode my bikes there and asked him if I could have a job working at the boat shop. He said, "What can you do?" And I said, "Well, I can do anything." And he said, "Well, I guess." So he started me at, they called it 6 bits an hour, and that's 75 cents. 2 bits is a quarter. So I was making 75 cents a quarter an hour. So then he had at the shop, besides selling boats at that time, in the early days, they sold sporting goods and bicycles. Sporting goods would be like shotguns, fishing rods, gym shoes, all kind of stuff like that. Anything you could think of in like a Dick's Sporting Goods, we probably were able to sell back then at the boat shop. So the first thing he had me do was clean windows, and the whole front, because of selling boats, was big windows that were probably 8 feet tall, and the width of the building. So I would go out with Grandpa, and he showed me how to clean them, and I did that. And then over time, I started fixing the Schwinn bikes because they would come in a box, and you have to do final assembly on them. I put them together, and in the process of that, I would clean the floors and then all the boats were across maybe 3/4 of the shop up there, and then there was a lower level to it because it was built in a hill, and that's where the shop was for boats. So I always would go down there and clean and organize things down there and talk to the mechanics and sort of like playing around with that. But back on the bike thing, there was a place that was real close to there, and it was called the Village Shopping Center, and they had this Chuck Wheeler place that sold hot dogs, and everybody liked their hot dogs, and these probably people still do. So I would ride my bike down there and get the order from everybody and the money, and I go down and buy the hot dogs. And we were all there. Right across from the hot dog place was a J.C. Penney, and I talked the manager, went upstairs and talked to him and told him that his bikes were sort of junky and people were always complaining about them. So I talked him into bringing them twice a week down to our shop and then pick them up, the ones that we had fixed. And so it was such a good deal. We were doing so well. My grandpa gave me a raise to $1.25 an hour. And back then, in the seventh, eighth grade, I had so much money I didn't know what to do with it with that. So over time, I started spending more time in the shop, and so I went to Mercury School and learned how to work on the outboard motors, and then the Mercruiser were the inboard motors like we have in our Formula that we have right now that some of you may know. And so I worked on those, and over time, more or less became the service manager, but I was a working service manager. So not only would I organize all that stuff, but I would also, the boats coming in and out, but I would actually repair them also. And back then I was the youngest ever master mechanic in the Mercury system for the outboards and Mercruisers. I don't know if that holds true today, but it was back then. You had to be 5 years as a mechanic. It was certified to be able to qualify for that, and then you had to be nominated by the service reps that would take a look at it. So anyhow, they did all that, and I got that award, and I invented a couple tools and different things like that. But back in the old days, when boats would come in, we would buy them from Rinker, and then a company called Sea Nymph, and another company called Starcraft. But the boats would come in, they didn't have any windshields on them, no controls, no gauges, no motors. Steering systems were installed, but they weren't hooked up to the motors. So all that stuff we had to do. Now this is 2020. When boats come in today to dealers, the manufacturers do all that and they come all assembled. But in those old days, the boats would come in, we'd have to put them on a trailer, adjust the trailers to the boat. We'd have to pick which motor went on it, and sometimes somebody would maybe put like a 90 horse motor on there, and a guy would want a 150 horsepower motor. So we'd have to swap those out when whatever it did take to make a sale. So I did that, and I did that all the way till I got into real estate. And I got into real estate because I really wanted to buy that boat company and work there. But then I got into real estate and started doing real well. And I was working a ton of hours at both places. I was working probably 40 hours a week at the boat shop and probably 40 hours a week doing real estate. And Grandma Bunny, she said, you know what, you got to pick one or the other because you're going crazy. And I'll support you and be behind you whichever way you go. So that's how I ended up leaving the boat shop. I gave them a few months' notice and said that I'm going to do real estate, and then I left there. But when I did leave there, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it in real estate. So Kim Slocum, a good friend of mine, he was the president of Rinker Boat Company, and the owner of the Rinker Boat Company, his name was John Rinker. They wanted me to go to work for them full time as like a national sales manager. But I really didn't want to be on the road. I wanted to be home with Melissa and Jacqueline and Michael and Grandma Bunny. So I ended up doing that part time while I was in real estate. And we'll talk about real estate in another video, but I did do real well on that. But for over 20 years, I still did that job working at Rinker Boat Company just because it was a fun thing to do. And I enjoyed it, and I was able to get new boats every year, and just I just always loved and had a passion for boating. So that's video one of the coronavirus self-coronation that we're in. And so it's a good time to tell you a little bit about my past.